Well, Midwest Fur Fest 2025 has come and gone, and now the season is nearly upon us where I forget how to be creative for several months. But before I do, I want to share with you one of the highlights of my convention the panel I hosted, partially because I know a number of folks who were interested but couldn't make it in person, but also because I'm just really proud of it. And also because I'm a perfectionist and this is my chance to get it just right. So, what follows is an adaptation of the deck I used with a handful of updates and adjustments to better suit an online audience. I hope you enjoy watching it as much as I enjoyed writing and presenting it. Without further ado, this is the Mouthful, sort of. I'm a skunk, and here's today's special. First, a little about myself. My name is Ringer, or you may know me online as Matches. I'm a raccoon, coyote, donkey, sometimes other things on the internet, and also in real life. I live in the Midwest with my badger husband and 2 actual cats, and I'm a UX designer, visual artist, and hobbyist photographer, but kinda lazy about it. And last, but certainly not least, I'm obsessed with animal costumes in a very normal and healthy way, and have been for basically my whole life. And that's why I'm the ideal candidate to cover this topic. But what exactly is this topic? Well, think about all the times you've fursuited at a convention. And if you never have, just imagine wearing something super warm that makes it harder to breathe and see and talk and hear. Also, you can wander around a random hotel and or convention center yelling through layers of foam and fur at others who are doing the same, and as a result, you can barely understand each other. To be fair, it's a pretty good time, right? I'm not disputing that. But what I will say is that some of my favorite fursuiting moments are before it even starts, like getting ready in the hotel room with friends and just talking and procrastinating instead of putting your heads on and going to the lobby like you planned, or hanging out in the headless lounge when everybody knows they should get back out there, but nobody really wants to because it's comfy and the vibe is too good. There's something really great about being mostly an animal, especially amongst friends. And I'm here to tell you that's an experience we can and should be able to take with us throughout the convention. You can probably see where this is going. If you guessed it had something to do with the title of this panel, you are very smart and correct. But you might also be wondering whether this is a concept that really warrants distinction. How much different is an open-face fursuit from a kigurumi or normal fursuit, really? And that's a fair question, so let's dig into it. Because yes, these open-face outfits do share a general form factor with kigurumis, in that they're animal-shaped and you can see the wearer's face, but the similarities kind of end there. One of the biggest differences is obviously the materials. Kigus are mostly made of fleece rather than fur. They're also generally designed to be oversized and baggy, and these factors mean they don't have the same inherent coziness as something more furry or fitted. The hood is also oversized and usually features the character's face, and kigus don't often account for any sort of hand or foot coverings, leaving the wearer to figure that out for themselves. Which is fun. The great thing about kigurumis is how they allow you to represent your character in a very casual, versatile way, and in that sense, it could be argued that they're more like an article of clothing rather than a costume. But even though these open-face costumes are technically furry suits, they're not really fursuits either, despite the title. For the most part, modern fursuits tend to be very fitted and often include additional padding for things like digitigrade legs or muscles or bellies or what have you. Most obviously, fursuits also have faces, but those and the rest of their associated parts tend to be separate for convenience rather than attached. But the point of a fursuit is to be the absolute physical realization of someone's character, even if that's just a more idealized version of themselves, which is why they're getting increasingly more detailed and intricate and expensive as makers continue to improve the craft. However, attaining this sort of transformative shift convincingly generally requires the wearer to be fully concealed. As a result, open-face suits aren't typically created or worn with the same purpose, nor do they strive for the same level of detail, content instead to be seen for what they are, a costume rather than a whole other character. Hopefully this has established that what we're talking about here is indeed something distinct enough from both kigurumi and fursuit to be worthy of its own label. But even so, it's not exactly a new idea, right? We've seen plenty of costumes like this, just rarely in furry spaces. And I think I have some idea as to why, but to better understand that, we need to look beyond their physical differences. Because it's just as important that we recognize the cultural significance of open-face costumes relative to kigurumis and fursuits, and we can start by comparing their origins. While furry has a deep connection with dressing up as animals, we obviously didn't come up with the idea. Fursuits are descendants of mascots and theme park costumes, but with decades of evolution to better suit our specific aesthetics and wearability preferences. And while kigurumis bear a resemblance to children's onesies and pajamas, their Japanese street cred was enough to win us over and catch the attention of furry artists, who have since continued to put their own distinct spin on them. But what of the open-face costume? There really isn't a furry-specific analog to these, because for some reason the fandom never latched onto them in the same way. And I don't think it's for lack of awareness, maybe the opposite, honestly. It's likely these are the first animal costumes many of us ever experienced, but it's the nature of those experiences that has shaped our collective opinion. Maybe they dredge up memories of cheaply made, low-quality Halloween costumes, and that's not wholly inaccurate, even though some of them can be pretty charming. But they can also just as easily be very embarrassing, especially for the kid who just wanted to be a superhero or not dress up at all, or the adult at the office party where everyone else is in some variation of normal clothes but different, aside from that one guy wearing a full fursuit again. But as so many things are, this is exacerbated by the media, because in addition to real-life experiences, there have also been plenty of open-face costumes in TV, movies, theater, books, and so on, so let's talk about how that has looked. I think we can break it down into 3 different categories, each with examples that have ruined me personally. The first is actors who are playing an animal character and have no on-screen awareness of the fact that they're in a costume at all. This is often accompanied by makeup or prosthetics, but has for the most part fallen out of favor now that everything is computers. And while not exclusively, they're most commonly found in family or children's media or roles that are inherently unserious. Speaking of which, I'd be remiss if I didn't add this, considering it aired the day after the panel and it was sent to me so many times, which I deeply appreciate. You guys get me. More importantly, it feels worth mentioning that SNL is one of the few places to still see new additions to this category with some frequency, particularly within Weekend Update. It's comedy, yeah, but nobody is acknowledging the costume. She just is a raccoon, and that's the accepted fiction for the sake of the bit. That's an important distinction. But we're not actors playing roles, and we know these are costumes, so what's next? Well, we've got kids in costumes. Most kids love to play dress-up, and pretending to be something or someone else by putting on a funny outfit is part of being a kid, so there's not really any cause to be embarrassed when you're a child doing childish things. At least, not most of the time. But we're not kids either, technically, and Ralphie here segues nicely into the final and most relevant category. Because more often than not, putting someone in a silly animal costume is done for comic relief at their expense. They're not in on the joke, they are the joke. So here's SNL again, but in this rare case, the turkey suit is the premise of the bit, and it's admittedly a really good one. And seeing this sort of thing definitely changed the chemistry of my dumb kid brain, realizing I was supposed to bask in the humiliation of these people being subjected to this. What could be more embarrassing? Never mind that they were getting paid to be animals on TV, which in retrospect sounds like a pretty great day of work. So we were to enjoy a bit of schadenfreude, because hey, at least it wasn't us being forced into silly animal outfits, right? Right? Certainly this wouldn't come back to bite me later in life. I definitely wasn't seeing all of these and having the same recurring thought. Hey, there's our boy from the title. I was already a furry when that episode of CSI aired, but had never been to a convention, and even then I knew it wasn't an accurate representation. But why not? Why can't we have guys dressed in cute, silly animal suits giving lectures on the intersection of sociology and pop culture? So what have we learned here? Maybe that costumes like these are cheap and disposable, ready to be forgotten after they've served their purpose for Halloween or some other one-off event. Maybe that they're childish, worn by actors performing for children, if not children themselves. Or maybe that they're little more than a punchline, something the wearer should be rightfully embarrassed about, a predicament to be avoided. But above all, what these examples and countless others have all but cemented is that despite being animal costumes, they're not really furry. They're mainly still products of pop culture at large rather than being a cornerstone of the furry costuming experience the way fursuits or kigus are. But the thing is, you're missing out. I started this with the assertion that open-face fursuits are the best fursuits to wear at conventions, and so far all I've done is try to convince you that they're not really fursuits at all. What I haven't done is say anything to actually support that initial claim. And I'm still not going to because first, I want to try to cover what I think are some of the most common objections. There is a tangible feeling of safety and security to be found in the anonymity of a fursuit, and with it, a level of confidence that comes from being perceived as entirely something else. I don't think I'd be where I am now if not for that, so if you're still at a point where that's the only way you can enjoy being an animal, that's fair. That was me for a long time. And it's still especially nice to disappear into a character when I'm fursuiting in public, interacting with people who have no idea who's inside the suit and whom I'll never see again in my life. But I don't think the same can be said for furry spaces like conventions, because the longer you've been an animal in this fandom, the more likely it is that people already kinda know you, even if they don't specifically know what you look like, and that anonymity you were so protective of naturally evaporates as you spend more time here and make more connections. That's a good thing. I don't think this would be a very fun place to exist if we all had to constantly pretend we were someone else all the time. Maybe it's the opposite, though. Maybe you're worried that you're only recognizable in your fursuit, and honestly, there's merit to that in a crowded space where it's easier to spot a cartoon animal than a human face. But at the same time, you have to ask yourself who you're doing this for. Are you only wearing your fursuit as some sort of public service to make yourself findable? And findable by who? To do what? Fursuiting is great if you're having fun, and I'm not here to take that from you. But it shouldn't feel like just another obligation either, especially at a convention where time is already precious. And I can't argue that a crucial aspect of fursuiting for many, myself included, is the performance of it all. I wouldn't say I'm awesome at it personally, but I definitely appreciate commitment to a good bit, and that's something I aspire to. It's just, the bit can be particularly hard to commit to at conventions, especially larger ones. It can still be fun, yeah, but you're also competing for attention with dozens of other bits happening around you at any given time, and all the noise and commotion means there's no room for nuance or subtlety. You've got to go big or go home. That gets real tiring real fast if you can't keep up. And even then, some people just want to talk to you and not be part of the bit at all. Now this kinda goes back to the first one, but it's also what I've worried the most about. When I was a kid, being laughed at was the worst possible fate I could imagine. Those embarrassing predicaments felt like a real threat when all my energy was spent trying to be cool and normal in the hopes of being accepted. Being funny on purpose was not a concept or skill I possessed at the time, and suffice it to say, this has shaped who I am now and is still something I'm trying to figure out. And this was before the age of social media, the increased visibility of which means that nowadays, no matter who we are or what we enjoy, somebody out there is ready to laugh at us, to remind us how silly or weird or cringe they think we are. And the fear of this reaction, not just from internet strangers, but especially from people we actually care about, can make it really difficult to enjoy things publicly that don't fit neatly within the zeitgeist, which makes it nearly impossible to engage with each other at both community and individual levels in an earnest way. Being genuine requires some amount of vulnerability. Vulnerability is weakness, and weakness is cringe. But if you're here watching this, that ship has sailed, so you may as well enjoy the ride. Looked at through the lens of society as a whole, everything about furry is cringe and weird and silly, but that's part of what makes it fun. It just wouldn't be very interesting if we all enjoyed exactly the same things, exactly the same way, so why should what we do within the fandom be any different? I know it's trite, that I'm a broken record, and that I'm somewhat hypocritical for saying this when I have trouble taking chances myself. But I also understand the regret that comes with not taking those chances earlier. All I can do is try to be more honest about who I am and what I like, both because it makes me feel better about myself, but also because I want to lead by example. And if people look at me funny for not wearing the right type of animal costume, that says more about them than it does about me. But the reality is, they're probably not looking, because we're so worried about what everyone else will think that we forget everyone else is also too worried about that to necessarily notice the weird thing we're doing, even at a con. Even if that weren't the case, when confronted with the unfamiliar, a lot of us are probably more likely to politely avoid rather than try to figure out how to engage. This isn't limited to open-face costumes, as anyone who wears prosthetics or use your own eye masks can likely attest to. They all exist in this potentially confusing liminal space between person and character, and it's easier to ignore entirely than risk creating an awkward situation by interacting in a way that's not what the costumer is hoping for. Like, can you ask for a photo, or is that going to make them uncomfortable because their face is visible? That's not an issue with normal fursuits, and it's enough extra perceived friction that maybe it's better not to ask at all. But I think this is a flawed argument, because if we, as costumers, didn't want to be perceived, we wouldn't be at conventions wearing these costumes in front of you and thousands of other people. So I cannot stress enough that if someone is wearing a thing you think is fun or cool or cute, tell them. Respectfully, obviously, but tell them. Ask for a photo. Sure, maybe the interaction will be awkward, but it's just as likely that it will really make their day to be noticed rather than actively ignored. It's like that saying, the opposite of love is not hate, it's indifference. And finally, there doesn't seem to be any widely accepted word to adequately describe this specific sort of costume or costuming, which speaks to how niche it really is. Open-face fursuit is clunky, but also the most unambiguous compared to something like onesie, which has a wide variety of meanings, or hoodsuit, which I guess is a real thing, but I've never heard used in the context of furry. There's also sphinx and sphinxing, named for the mythological figure with a human face and animal body, and honestly, that's the best of the bunch. It's still animal-based, it's clever, and there's almost no ambiguity. Despite all of this, you may find yourself in a situation where it's hard to go back to putting on that fursuit head because the advantages will have won you over. I know we all approach conventions with different goals, but mine center mainly around seeing friends, especially ones I only get to see a couple times a year. And as much fun as it is goofing around in fursuit, that actively gets in the way of just having a conversation when opportunities to have those conversations at conventions are already few and far between. It's so much easier to speak and hear and read expressions, and that's just really nice when you can also be an animal at the same time. And unsurprisingly, when your face is uncovered, it leaves you able to do a lot of other things too, whether drinking, snacking, unlocking your phone, shooting photos, or anything else that would be made more complicated by limiting your vision or other senses. I already talked about how tempting it is to remain in the fursuit lounge or hotel room just a little longer before you put that head back on, because you know how much your comfort is going to be impacted when you finally do. And I'm not saying it isn't worth it, but you can't deny that sometimes you just want to be able to breathe normally, to not immediately overheat, to not have to deal with the weird little fitment issues on your nose or ears or wherever, all while still enjoying the coziness that comes from being furry, right? This is the way. And here's the thing. For every fursuiter out there really making a performance out of it, there are probably a dozen who are just hanging out, right? I don't mean that to be dismissive, but they're not there to be a character specifically, they just want to enjoy being an animal shape. And that's what's so great about this. You don't have to come up with a whole shtick, you don't have to perform, you can just be a person in a costume, whether it's your OC or even just a random animal you like. But also, while you can certainly just put on a costume and call it a day, this is the perfect canvas for experimenting with prosthetics, makeup, and other ways to change your face into the shape you always wanted. Maybe I can just wear a different expression so it doesn't look like I'm so grumpy all the time. Or you can claim you've gotten stuck mid-TF. The possibilities really are endless. And I mentioned earlier that costumes like these tend to be lower fidelity, and that they generally lack the very precise details that help make fursuits what they are, like the head, the paws, the shaping and tailoring of the body. That's not to say they aren't also made with love and care, but a lower barrier to entry means this might be a project that's a little less demanding if you do want to try to make something for yourself. More on that in a minute. And finally, do I really need to explain this one? I didn't think so. So I want to finish up with a couple notes about where to go from here if this sort of costume does appeal to you. It's somewhat of a conundrum, because there really don't seem to be any good off-the-rack sources if you want something well-made and with quality materials. Instead, it's likely you'll need to look into commissioning one. But a relative lack of demand within furry means that, unlike with a kigu or fursuit, it's difficult to find makers who specialize in this style of costume, or at least advertise that they do. Two Tails Enterprises is one that I'm name-dropping because they specifically offer this option, but you have to go into it understanding that the materials and time needed aren't that much less than they might be for a regular fursuit when all is said and done, and the price will reflect that. It's entirely possible other makers may be interested in taking on projects like this as well, but the only way to know for sure is to ask. And while I'm on the subject, if you're a fursuit maker and this is something you'd be willing to make, advertise it. Etsy is also an option, and with some creative searching, you might be able to find sellers there who will accept custom commissions. And finally, some mascot companies may have open face options or be willing to substitute a hood in place of the standard mascot head. It's an unconventional ask, but many of them build their costumes to order already, and this sort of substitution might be a viable option. But like I said before, this is a great opportunity to try your hand at making something yourself. A good place to start would be with these patterns from McCall's or Simplicity, which should cover the spread of parts you need for a basic costume, including different varieties of ears and tails. But you'll probably still need to do a little improvising to get things just right, especially if you want everything attached. Even so, if you're familiar with basic sewing, it should be more than manageable. But maybe that's all too big of a commitment, or you just don't want to have another thing to worry about packing for a con. Well, I have a solution for you. With some extra fur that matches your fursuit, you can make a hood to wear in place of the normal head. It's a much easier project that only requires a fraction of the time and materials, and the final product takes almost no additional space in your bags, so it's easy to bring along. Now, if only there was a pattern you could use for something like this that was also free. Oh, right. I made one of these, and now you can too. There'll be a link in the description, and please let me know if you end up using it because I'd love to see what you come up with and hear feedback. So what have we learned today? Well, that open-faced animal costumes present an alternative to fursuiting that's more comfortable and easier to live with while still capturing a lot of the same joy, but despite this are underrepresented in the furry fandom. This can at least be somewhat attributed to our own personal baggage and their portrayal in pop culture, but is also a result of a general wariness within furry for stepping beyond the boundaries of the expected, even though the fandom as a whole is already decidedly outside of those boundaries. This lack of visibility within furry also means it's difficult for people to know how to engage with costumes like these, and makes it more challenging to obtain one that is well made, since most fursuit makers aren't necessarily advertising it as an option, if they're willing to make them at all. As a result, people who might be interested but not enough to DIY or actively ask around will move on to other things, ensuring this all remains niche. Thus, the cycle continues. And I was going to say it still doesn't have a name, but I did create the Sphinx tag on FurTrack. Except then they removed all the photos I added because they don't count as fursuits, which is also what I said earlier, so I guess I played myself. We're still calling it sphinxing though. Now, this is where my last slide would have been, but I wanted to see you again. You might think I'm going to make one final pitch to try to sell you on all of this, but the truth is, I don't need to. I've already won because I got to stand here wearing this and share my weird, silly interest with you. And that's the thing. The point of furry isn't for everyone to enjoy the same thing the same way. It's to find the things you like doing, do them the way you like doing them, and hopefully form bonds with others who feel the same. Being niche is certainly not without its challenges, but there's also something pretty cozy about it. As furries, we already know this, and that's why we're so sensitive to the mainstreamification of the fandom. So if this did convince you to give open-face sphinxing, a shot, awesome. If it was something you were already into and you're just here to see whether I could do it justice, I hope I did. And for everyone else, I wish you all the best in finding something that you're equally obsessed with, and also the confidence to share it. Thank you, and stay weird.